Good morning, this is Mr. Pickering Walters, and this is video 2 of the Lead Editors Training Series for Granada High School's Studio Broadcast Productions program. Looking at our Lead Editors Checkoff sheet, we've completed all of these tasks. In our last video, we brought down the best take number 5, and removed that one bad story that was reshot during take 5. We also had edited take 3 and replaced a bad story with a better take from take 2. These are the two typical situations that you will find yourself in when being lead editor. Once you bring the stories, or the best takes, down into the project timeline for that week's video El Aviso, if you need to take a break, that's usually a good spot to rest. You might need to attend your 3rd or 4th period class, and while you are away, the computer graphics generator number 1 or number 2 might come in and do some work. They might key your background and place the themed background behind your anchors. They could add in the title sequence and or the credits. They could start adding B-roll and or lower thirds. All of these things can happen independent of the main editing. Because Final Cut Pro 10 is a non-linear editor, the timeline is non-destructive and can be moved anywhere. If you are ever worried about someone on the crew messing up something that you have done, it's good to take a snapshot of your project by right-clicking on the project timeline inside the event and choose Duplicate Project as a snapshot. This will make a snapshot of your timeline at that particular moment in time. If you need to go back to it, it's actually easier than a full backup. For this portion of the training, we're going to look at inserting the segments into the show.
Now here's nerdy news.
We can listen to the anchor's intro to the segment, and we hear that it is nerdy news. We can go to the Segments and Credits event in our library and choose Try To Week 6 Nerdy News. We'll drag it down to the timeline and place it inside the placeholder. When we do that, the computer asks us if we would like to replace it from start, replace it from end, replace it with retime, and so on. We're just going to replace. It is a good idea to look at the pauses both before and after the segments to see if you need to adjust them.
Now here's nerdy news.
Hey Granada, welcome to another nerd.
The pause at the start isn't too bad. It could be considered a bit long, so we might do some adjustments to it later.
March 29th of this year. Back to you, studio.
Thanks, Seth.
The pause at the end seems a bit too long, so we'll shorten it just a bit.
That's it for nerdy news. Back to you, studio.
Thanks, Seth.
So, nerdy news is in. Earlier in our timeline, we have a placeholder for sports.
Here's Mason and Cole with a new segment.
We'll take a sports segment from the Segments and Titles event and place it into the placeholder in the timeline. Just like nerdy news, we'll check the spaces before and after the segment and adjust anything we feel is necessary.
And Cole with a new segment.
Good morning, Granada. Welcome to our new sports segment, Matador Sports. We're going to be reporting on all of the sports here in Granada. Yeah. Back to you, studio.
Thanks, guys.
Now, we have a segment called QQ Week 6, but we don't have a placeholder for it. This happened because the segment's producer didn't include their segment page into the director's binder prior to filming the show. The teleprompter operator didn't have their planned intro, so they didn't create one. While we do have a workaround that we will use to solve this issue, it is actually a really important issue. Crew members that work on segments don't get credited in the credits, and they may not receive a grade for their work if the segment page isn't in the director's binder on time. So we're going to watch a bit of QQ to see if there's a question that might tie into a news story and could be good to place it near. Ideally, we'll have a story that relates to the question, then go to the segment, then back to the next story. Let's hear what the question is for this week.
Is a hot dog a sandwich? No, it's a sub.
I don't think so because it only actually.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
It sounds like he asks the same question for the whole segment. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Let's see what other stories we have. Here is our intro.
Good morning, Granada. I'm Erin.
And I'm Janine. This is your video El Aviso for Thursday, January 17th.
This is where we would normally jump in with the title sequence. I'm going to blade this piece right here, and we can insert a placeholder for the title sequence. It looks like there's a frame or two of Erin right here that is creating a bit of a jump cut where I cut it. But we can deal with that when we actually do the title. We'll just insert the placeholder for now. Play the first story.
Any boys interested in playing golf this spring? Tryouts will be coming soon. Tryouts will be held from Monday, January.
Which is boys golf.
Information ASAP.
Spring sports registration is
Here's another sports story.
Scholarship. The Tri-Valley Retired Educators
Scholarships.
March 8th. Freshmen, sophomores, and juniors will have the chance to take a practice SAT.
SAT, ACT.
program at Las Positas College is an exciting option for high school students.
Middle college.
If you have lost a jacket or a sports bag,
Lost and found. Then we go into a segment. I'm going to zoom out on the timeline, and in this situation, we have this much time, then a segment, this much time of stories, and then another segment, then more stories, and finally the outro. Ideally, we'd place the segments equally throughout the show, but we'll need to either cut this section in half or this section in half.
Sign-up sheets are located outside of the leadership room. Make sure that you sign up today.
This is Granada's Got Talent as a story, so it could go here. I'll place a marker to remind me.
Visit the College and Career Center website.
on Friday, March 8th, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors will have the chance to take.
This space is between the scholarship story and the SAT story.
Showing your strengths and weaknesses.
The Middle College High School
This space is between the SAT story and the middle college story. Let's go ahead and place it between the SAT story and the middle college story. Because none of these stories relate to the segment, this is really just an editing decision. It's up to you and your experience of how long you believe the audience will listen to stories before they get to watch a segment. So I've cut it and can drag QQ right in. I would drop a placeholder if I was planning this out, but since we're ready to just drop in QQ, I'll just drag it into the cut area that we have. Drag QQ into it. QQ is definitely longer than any other segment. We'll see how this goes. We may want to cut a piece out of it, though, if it isn't interesting enough. While it's not the lead editor or the director's job to trim down someone else's segment or edit it, sometimes we need to make some editing decisions last minute, like shortening a segment, or if we see something in the background that shouldn't be there, things like that might cause us to do some editing, even though it's not our project to edit.
Hey Granada, welcome to another Nerdy News.
If you look at Nerdy News, we have an opening, and then it goes to their custom title sequence. Then it goes into the rest of the segment. Sports just dropped right into the stories with no intro, but it's a new segment, so that might develop over time. If we want to put a title sequence into QQ, we can start with his first debate about hot dogs.
Is a hot dog a sandwich? No, it's a sub.
Cut between the first response and the second, and insert a gap.
A hot dog is a sub. But a sub is a sandwich.
A gap is just like a placeholder, except that it's just black. It's just going to remind me that I need to put a title in there. The reason we want to place these segments and other items in at this time is to get an idea of how long the actual show is. If it's going to be 15 or 16 minutes long, we may want to leave something out or shorten it. In the example of QQ, we might cut out one or two responses that aren't as engaging or as funny as the others. There's no use in going through all of the effort to key everything if you're going to just cut stuff out. So take a moment and just watch where we are right now. Pause this video, watch the whole show, and when you return, we'll pick up from where we left off. So now that you've watched it, let's do the keying. In order to do keying, we need to open our effects palette. We're going to choose the category of keying and choose Keyer. We will drag the keyer over to the clip that we want to put it on. And that looks horrible. Let's undo and try that again. Nope, it did it again. It kind of makes him look like Satan. If we look at the mat, it's actually keying them instead of the background. So let's delete that keyer. What's happening here is that our Panasonic cameras have a very wide dynamic range in the color. It can cause it to look a little washed out because it's expected that in editing we will apply a LUT, which is also known as a lookup table. It's also possible that we'll crush the blacks and the highlights during editing. So here we'll take a quick break from keying and deal with the color board. I can drag the whole video and pull the color towards green, purple, warmer, cooler, etc., and see how it affects it. I encourage you to experiment with large changes to get a sense as to what that change will do. But know that you're ultimately going to want to do very, very subtle changes. I'm really not liking any of this. So let's hit reset to reset the entire color board. Instead of color, let's look at exposure. I can take the entire exposure and we can overexpose or underexpose the entire image. That isn't really helping. Let's try just the midtones. The midtones are represented by the middle gray dot. Shadows are represented by the black dot, and highlights are represented by the white dot. I can overexpose the midtones or underexpose them. When I underexpose our midtones, that looks a little bit better. I can also underexpose our shadows and then overexpose our highlights, and I kind of like that. Now, while this looks good on Anchor 2, we do need to double check and see how it affected Anchor 1. And it looks okay. It did an okay job on her color as well. Now that I like that change, I want to apply it to all of my other clips. To copy the information from this clip, I am going to highlight the clip, go to the menu, and choose Edit Copy. Most of you know it as Command-C. Now I'll highlight all of my other clips. I'm going to paste the attributes of the first clip to these clips. If I just choose Paste in the menu, it would replace these clips with the clip I copied. But we only want to paste some attributes of the clip to the other ones. When I choose Paste Attributes, I can select which attribute or attributes to apply. There. I like that all the way around. That cleaned up all of those shots in one step. Depending where you're at in your color vision, your color range, the monitor settings you're using, etc., your choices might be different than mine. The more experience you get with it, and the more that you know about how people will be watching your media, you can customize it to your style and needs. If you know that people will be watching your show in a classroom on a projector that has its brightness cranked all the way up, you might want to adjust it to look best on that platform. If you know that people will be watching it on their phones, you can customize your settings to look best on phones. Now, let's apply the keyer again and see if we get a better key. There's our keyer, and we're already getting a better key. Just drop that keyer onto your clip. The keyer makes this a little bit more orangey on her scarf. While I have that clip selected, I want to click on my inspector and choose the video footage. Here is the keyer. I have my sample color where I can add colors to that key. I can adjust the strength of the keyer. We can see that the light is a little hotter in the upper corner. As we back off the keyer strength, we can see that we lose that key in that area. What I really want to see is the matte view. We can see that some of her hat and some of Erin's hair and even part of the desk isn't keying fully. We are going to fill the holes in the key. You only want to pull this up a tiny bit at a time. You'll see the speckles disappear, and you only want to go far enough to protect that area. We have one unique situation here as well. Anchor 2's chair has a meshy background. Both chairs actually do, but Janine is sitting in a way that we can actually see the mesh from the camera view. Depending on how we fill the holes, we will still see some green through it, and that part will show the background. So we're not going to fill the holes based on the chair. We're going to use her hair and her hat to set how much to fill. There are many other ways to adjust a keyer, and the more experience you have, the more adjustments you might choose to make. Okay, so I like the keyer that we have set up for this clip. Just like we did when we applied the color board attribute to the other clips, after copying the information from our clip, I'll choose all of the other clips and paste attributes. I don't want to apply the color board a second time, so I'm only going to choose the keyer. So now let's take a break because we've finished applying our keyer. So come back for Lead Editor Tutorial Part 3, where we'll be placing backgrounds and adjusting them so that they look like they're coming from 3 camera views.